only X number of hours in the day to get your food in. If you've gotten to the point where you're having a hard time getting all your food in, you can basically be multitasking and get a large meal in that pre, intra, and post-workout period. And it will make things easier to get the rest of the calories in during that day. So let's say you got meals that are 1,000 calories, use that as an easy number, and you're trying to do 5,000 calories a day. Maybe you take 200 calories off of each of those meals and put that into another meal. And now those meals are smaller, and it's kind of interesting. It's almost, people find, it's almost if that peri-workout drink meal doesn't even count. It makes it easier to get the rest of the meals in. So that's important. And when you're dieting down too, I think it's in terms of turning on the anabolic machinery with protein, carbs, maybe probably a hormonal effect there with carbohydrate. You want your workouts, the reason why you're doing workouts, unless you're someone who's adding in gear, for instance, for the first time, or coming back after a huge layup, you're not going to have a recomp effect, although it does happen. But you want your workouts to be as anabolic as possible, right? And potentially and somewhat anti-catabolic. So having that peri-workout in there makes sense, especially when you're dieting down.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson. I'm Scott McNally, and all of our programming is brought to you by you. Thank you to everybody from Patreon for helping to make this thing happen. We're brought to you by TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK over there. They've got cheap carb powders, which is one of the reasons I relied on them for so long. You can get Carbo Load for like $10 a bag. It's 15 servings of 50 grams. So if you're using 25 grams, that's like 30 workouts for $10. You can't beat that. And we are brought to you by supplementsource.ca for Canadians. They have great deals. And even with the closures of shipping with the Canadian Post, they're still getting things out through UPS and FedEx and sources like that. And we are brought to you by byobbcoach.com. Scott's book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. We've got a bunch of fun training talk to get into today. Scott, you were doing something where you were signing some autographed copies of your book. Is that still available?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because you reminded me that I was wanting to mention that here. I need to post it on Instagram too. So yeah, I've had people over the years, sometimes when I've done seminars, they want an autographed copy of the book, and I bring the books and, write something, whatever they wanted, or just try to come up with something witty. And then I had someone in the UK, Theo, what's up, man, if he's listening, and he wanted a signed copy. So it's a little bit like, I never asked for anything extra in doing that. I just had them pay whatever. But sometimes
50 for an autograph.
No, I wasn't doing like a Lou Ferrigno or whatever. It always just get me on the shipping. But the shipping would be crazy, like $70, to ship, and it's going like to Europe or something like that. I think the highest was like 83 to Australia or something. And I'm like, but I've been selling some things on eBay. I'm like, I can do this on eBay really slickly. You can set up an auction or a for sale to come up at a certain time. So, hey, this is going to go on sale at whatever time. Just be there, looking for it. When it pops up, you just make sure you buy it. And then I know it's you, and I'll just sign it and send it out. And eBay makes the shipping label. So, like, this is slick. So I have a bunch of books. I'm getting ready to move somewhere. I don't want to drag them with me. They're heavy, but they're worth a good bit. So I'm like, I'm going to just do this on eBay. So 15%, $15 goes to the ASPCA, and it's just a breeze to do. I sent 3 out this weekend to people who bought them, and so it goes to charity. I make less than I think I make less than I do any other way that people can buy the book. But it doesn't matter. It's it's cool, and that way people get the books, and I can write stupid, silly stuff in there. Whatever it is, if they want.
Have Scott tell you, like, you're the hardest trainer I have ever met.
Yeah,
Scott Stevenson.
I could do that. I'll do whatever you want, right?
All right. So here's the thing. A question came up on drugs and stuff the other day, and the question was related to nutrient timing. We were asked, how important is it to time your carbs up around your training? Is it that important? And I kind of explained a little bit of the historics of what I've seen. I remember years ago, Scott, that there was like zero nutrient timing. It was like, you just spread your carbs evenly through the day. I saw it go toward like really strict nutrient timing to the point where some people are only getting carbs in pre and post. And I almost feel like there's becoming a backlash to that. You know, things go in cycles. Right. And it almost seems like a lot of people are saying, hey, listen, it really doesn't matter. You know, if you take all your nutrients and you eat them all in one meal, as long as you, in a 24-hour period, you get all your food in that you're supposed to get in, that's all that really matters. So I thought this would be a great topic for us to talk about, the pros and cons. Is there a benefit to specifically timing your nutrients around your training? Yeah,
so I have, I kind of took the approach that many people have. I created this nutritional hierarchy of importance that I put in the book, the one you can get on eBay. I'm just going to keep on mentioning that. We can get on eBay right now. And at the bottom of that is your total caloric intake, of course. If you're trying to gain weight, you need more calories than you're burning off, so you can fuel the anabolic process. If you're trying to lose body fat, you have to have a caloric deficiency, blah, blah, blah. And I can't remember what level it's on, but up beyond that, just basic, you have to have enough protein in there. You should have adequate carbohydrate, at least getting that, in my opinion, getting that in somewhere so that you can fuel your training. Resistance exercise is going to rely highly on carbohydrates. So you got to get those things taken care of. There's no doubt about that. They're older somewhat now, but the papers are still good. They're still worth considering. There's mixed evidence suggesting that there's a nutrient timing effect on muscle growth when it comes to, for instance, taking in a protein or a protein carb or only a carb supplement around your training. So timing your nutrients. So one study or a study design might be taking a particular carbohydrate protein supplement before and after training versus taking in the morning at night. So keeping the calories the same and then just having a timing effect. From the big picture standpoint, the thing to consider is if I'm going to do something and there's some logical reason why it might work, is there also some reason to believe why it's not going to work, why it would be disadvantageous, right? So if I do take a nutrient timing approach, let's say I've got 3,000 calories and I've got a gram of protein per pound and I've got my essential fats taken care of and my rest of my calories from carbohydrate, wherever your diet tends to be, or you've chosen it, is it going to hurt me if I take a nutrient timing approach and try to make sure I've got, for instance, carbohydrate and protein coming in before and then thus during because I've got an interworkout in there, and then afterwards. So I take an extra meal that I would have during the day at other times, and I disperse that between the pre, intra, and post workout recovery periods. Is that going to hurt me in any way? Well, if someone goes way overboard and let's say they've got 3,000 calories in their diet and they try to do 2,000 calories in that period, and then they end up basically with sort of a relative short-term nutrient deficiency in that they're fasting or they're post-absorptive for a prolonged period during the day, then that could be overdone. That's way too much. Don't take in all 3,000 calories like right there before intra and afterwards. But all in all, no, it's not gonna hurt you. To do that. So that's an important thing. In any reasonable circumstances, it's not going to be a negative. The evidence does suggest there's a Cribb and Hayes study. There's a study by Willoughby. There's a study out of Australia where they use just carbohydrate, showing that the impact on cortisol reduction was related to the increase in muscle fiber size that they saw. Or the changes in cortisol during the supplementation period. So there's evidence suggesting it's not unanimous, and it's not every single time. And that's a whole other podcast to go through every single study and try to figure out what may have happened there. But there's evidence that it can potentially help. So yeah, is it more important to get your protein in, your total amount of protein in, than to have nutrient timing? Because sometimes people get sort of this orthorexic tendency where they're like, they will want to eat according to their specific nutrient timing distribution throughout the day, and if they don't have the right protein carbohydrate for their workout because they forgot, left it at home, they'll just do nothing, right? Instead of getting just like a Gatorade, which this study out of Australia mentioned was with Gatorade actually. They used to use Gatorade carbohydrates. So people will get so hung up on being perfectionistic that then they will just miss the big pictures. Like, if you need to double up on your post-workout meal to get your calories in for that day so that you can have that nutrient excess so you can grow, then yeah, for sure. So So it's not the most important thing, but it is an important strategy that in most cases is really unlikely to hurt you, and it can very likely be potentially advantageous. In almost every resistance exercise training study, not all of them, but many of them, you will see if you read the methods that they give a protein supplement after training. So if you look at the evidence on protein timing, it's totally mixed. Alan Aragon and Brad Schoenfeld have a study out there, or a review, and it was like 3 or 4 out of like the 19 studies that they had in their review analysis were with trained individuals. So there was a paucity of research there. But it's something that is just done because why not? Why not do that? Especially if you have, and especially in a research situation. And this is where, I'm drawing some of my evidence from, or some of my thought is someone goes into the lab and someone might, let's say, be using an intra-workout, but they're going to want to standardize that. So they're not going to say, well, yeah, just have whatever you want. They want to standardize your meal sequences, right? And some people might live on campus if it's at a university, and some people might live an hour away, right? So at least they want to standardize and know that they've got protein coming in after the workout. So that's typically what's done. I mean, unless they're looking at protein feeding before and after workout, but that's just added in. Everyone gets it in all situations, right? And maybe even in a control group, they'll give them the protein. But it's like you're comparing 2 different training protocols. Everyone will get that. So that just makes sense to do. They do it in the research studies just to cover those bases. Sorry, there's a giant plane flying over, if you can hear it.
Oh yeah, it's all right.
So yeah, it absolutely makes sense to do that. It matches up with when you've got the insulin is going to counter cortisol. Cortisol is has an impact potentially on the protein balance that you have. You've got your highest rate of protein synthesis. You've got sensitivity to protein. The protein synthetic machinery is sensitized. Biologically speaking, it makes sense to take in a complete protein source, an animal-based protein source with plenty of essential amino acids. And the argument that I make too, and the things I've written in my books, is that a lot of times people are training multiple body parts. So if you're going to just say, well, I'm going to take in a post-workout, that may mean that you got a 1 hour delay between the first muscle you trained in a workout and when you actually get the nutrients coming in. So if you, example I always use is chest, delts, triceps, and then you do abs maybe and walk on the treadmill for a little while. Your chest was trained at 9 o'clock, and then you don't get any food in your system until 10:15, 10:30. You've got a digestive lag. It's an hour and 45 minutes before those nutrients and the hormonal changes are happening. You can actually preempt that by having all those things available right then and there, by having starting an intra-workout and making it a peri-workout recovery supplement. So the other thing I'll say, because I got a lot of experience with clients this is just sort of a standard thing that I will add with them. A couple of things actually is if someone is used to doing that, and especially if they keep it up because they find that it makes a difference. Just that they notice that they're making better gains, if they're doing a good job of keeping everything else the same. But when they, for instance, forget their peri-workout recovery supplement and they train without it, they notice. And there's actually some studies showing that, for instance, carbohydrate will have an ergogenic effect during resistance exercise. There's actually studies with mouth rinsing where they use a sugary, it doesn't even have to have any carbs in it, but there's something in the brain that registers this as incoming energy. And
really?
It's really interesting, right? Placebo effect. There's an expectancy maybe that you think, well, I'm getting carbs. People are thinking, well, carbs are ergogenic. So if I'm drinking carbs, I'm going to perform better. So you do. The circuitry there, it's interesting, right? So those studies have been done. So when those things are missing, it could be kind of a nocebo effect. It's like, oh, I don't have my intra-workout. Now I'm screwed, right?
Yeah.
So that may be at work too. So I have to take that into account. But the thing that is, I think, really important, I'm kind of going through all the basic bullet points that I wrote in that article years ago, is if you're in a situation, the two things, if you're trying to gain weight, you've got only X number of hours in the day to get your food in. If you've gotten to the point where you're having a hard time getting all your food in, you can basically be multitasking and get a large meal in that pre, intra, and post-workout period. And it will make things easier to get the rest of the calories in during that day. So let's say you got meals that are 1,000 calories, use that as an easy number, and you would have to you're trying to do 5,000 calories a day. Maybe you take 200 calories off of each of those meals and put that into another meal, and now those meals are smaller, and it's kind of interesting. It's almost, people find, it's almost if that peri-workout drink meal doesn't even count. It makes it easier to get the rest of the meals in. So that's important. And when you're dieting down too, I think it's in terms of turning on the anabolic machinery with protein, carbs, maybe probably a hormonal effect there with carbohydrate. You want your workouts, the reason why you're doing workouts, unless you're someone who's adding in gear, for instance, for the first time, or coming back off a huge layup, you're not going to have a recomp effect, although it does happen. But you want your workouts to be as anabolic as possible, right? And potentially and somewhat anti-catabolic. So having that peri-workout in there makes sense, especially when you're dieting down. I see, and I understand this, like people are dieting down and they're spending a lot of their days hungry, and they want to have as much whole food as they possibly can, and they want to be able to eat as much, and they're not getting hungry during their workouts. Like they got their adrenaline going, maybe they got some pre-workout stim in there, so that's having an anorectic effect. They're not as hungry, but I think it makes sense, especially if you've been training in your off seasons and making gains with that intra-workout in there, to keep that there, dance with the one who brung you, but also make that workout stimulus as anabolic as you possibly can by providing the nutrients and creating the hormonal environment for an anabolic burst, so to speak, as short-lived as it might be in a hypocaloric environment. So keep the peri-workout in there during your diet. That's the last thing I take out with my clients. If at all possible, I leave that in there. In fact, I'll leave it in as large as possible. Keep the off-season size, keep that the same, and just peel the calories away from the time periods furthest away from the workout, so you don't impair the recovery from the workout, so that you can keep that you can stay as strong as possible, you can keep as much muscle as possible, which is the idea, obviously, when you're dieting. So, all right, that's it in a nutshell. I think I covered all the stuff.
I had a question. You mentioned cortisol. There's a relationship between that and training and blood sugar, was it, or insulin sensitivity? What was that all about? Can you explain that whole relationship?
There's a study by Tarpenning. They were out of Australia. I forget which university, but they gave what amounted to about 50 grams of of carbs. I think it was before and after resistance exercise, and they trained them for, I think, 12 weeks. And they looked at cortisol. I think it was just cortisol levels, and they may have measured area under the curve, but they assessed cortisol levels relative to the workout. And when you take in carbohydrates before a workout like that, you dampen the cortisol release. Normally you exercise, cortisol, epinephrine, catecholamines go up, cortisol goes up. Cortisol is helping with fuel utilization. You get a cortisol elevation. And more stressful the workout, the greater the cortisol too. Okay. But when you take in carbohydrate, you dampen that. So they actually found it was actually an inverse relationship between cortisol and muscle growth. And I think maybe it was the type 2. They just broke it down to type 1, type 2. I think it was the type 2 fibers. The correlation was like 0.78 or something like that. It was a really strong correlation, or inverse correlation. So the less cortisol you had, which is what carbs do, the more muscle growth you had. And the only thing I think the way they did the statistics is they lumped everyone together. They looked at cortisol versus fiber growth. The lower the cortisol, which is what the carbs did, the better the fiber growth. But they in order to increase their statistical power, they had so there were some people who actually, because they had lower cortisol for whatever reason, they didn't delineate between control group, the no carb group, and the carb group. But there was an association, if you looked at all of those subjects, but inverse correlation between cortisol and fiber growth. So the idea that you can kind of glean from that is the intervention was carbs, which reduces cortisol, and the more cortisol was reduced, the more muscle grew. So carbs, I mean, there's also potential. Green has done these studies. There's also potential for an ergogenic effect from carbohydrates, whether it's up in your head or maybe it's through replenishment of glycogen, which could make sense, especially while you're dieting down. If your glycogen levels are pretty low because your carbs are low, you can replenish glycogen during your rest periods. And it's not going to be harmful, I don't think, to have higher levels of muscle glycogen during your diet. So when you train, there's an insulin-like effect of contraction. You get insulin from the carbs that you have. Protein may even increase that insulin. So if you take in your carbs, let's say, or you layer your carbs or put your carbs closer to your workout, you potentially have an ergogenic effect from the carbs coming in. Some people, especially if they're coming in out of ketosis, they pop out of ketosis, or and they're like, okay, I feel good, I'm ready to train, I'm good to go. So there's that. There's this potential mouth rinse type of effect. I've got sweet stuff in my mouth. That's ergogenic in and of itself.
It's just wild to me.
It's crazy, right?
That.
Yeah. I mean, so I haven't looked at that literature for a while, but yeah, it's been documented a few times. And then you potentially have more if you're getting, especially if you're dieting and you're getting to where your glycogen is becoming perhaps restrictive in terms of being the fuel source for glycogenolysis or glycolysis to produce ATP rapidly, what you need for resistance exercise, then you might be keeping yourself out of that sort of iffy zone where your glycogen levels are getting low. So now you can perform better because the muscle has the fuel available. Eventually you just don't have the glycogen there, right? But this is kind of almost theoretical, but it's very likely that because the glycogen is dispersed. There are certain places you'll find it in the muscle cell, but when it may be that you have enough glycogen, if you just could easily tap into it for set X, whatever it might be, but it's dispersed and it's so thinly dispersed throughout the cell that there's an availability issue whereby you're not able to get the glucose out of the glycogen fast enough and feed it into glycolysis to produce the ATP you need for the set. Yeah. So if you can keep your glycogen higher by taking in carbs, getting insulin, you can actually increase your glycogen levels during a workout, at least hypothetically. I seem extra loud here. I may have to turn my mic down, but that's been demonstrated at least with interval training, where they've taken glycogen. They had people taking carbohydrate and done interval, like on a cycle ergometer. So there's that. And then because your carbs go in there and maybe you end up with preferentially storing those carbohydrates that are in your diet as glycogen because of the insulin-like effect, then you may end up with an average glycogen level that's higher throughout the day or throughout the days of your diet. And if you get to really low levels of glycogen, that's associated with a negative protein balance in muscle cells. So muscle cells will tend to be less catabolic if they're out of that really low glycogen level. So ergogenic effect, psychological, out of ketosis, mouth rinsing, ergogenic effect at the muscular level because of fuel availability, and potentially an effect on protein balance because of having higher glycogen levels, potentially. So it makes sense to have some carbs in there and maybe to focus it on your workout when you're in a diet.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
We did get a couple comments about tech stuff. Yeah, so guys, the audio levels are not balanced. So we apologize, but that will be fixed post-production. And somebody else said, for the love of God, please upload this after it's finished because it looks terrible right now. It will look a lot better, guys, in the final uploaded version. So we apologize for all of that tech stuff, but we're doing our best. And tune in because this will be released as a regular podcast as always, and it'll look and sound much better after I get a chance to work some magic with it. Though they're talking about that. Yeah, anyway, we had another question, Scott, that was kind of related to this. Somebody from the group asked us about carb cycling. And by the way, guys, anybody who's watching live, if you want to add any questions to the show today, we'd be happy to tackle them. Let's see here. Somebody had asked what the benefits were. Here it is. He asked this to the Facebook group for Think Big. How many here are utilizing carb cycling consistently? How are your results? I know it works. Just curious to see what everyone else's experience is like. And my first thought was that I feel like every diet that I put together in some fashion or another has a cyclical approach. Like even if I wasn't changing the diet, we might have like a cheat meal or a free meal once a week, or maybe we're eating less carbs on non-training days, which kind of goes back to our previous question, about nutrient timing.
Right.
To some level, there is a cyclical approach. I'd love to dig into just the basic topic, Scott, of carb cycling with you, and maybe figuring out, well, how do we start a carb cycle at a real basic level?
Mm-hmm.
How do I know how to adjust the carbs to turn it into a cycle?
Yeah, it's a general term, the way I understand it. So, so you can use the nutrient timing perspective, and you could call that a carb cycling because you have high days and low days, right? And then at the other end of the spectrum, there will people that will set up like a high, medium, and low cycle, and it can be like literally disjointed or almost completely disjointed from the training. So you've got a 3-day carb cycle and you've got a 5-day training cycle. So you're going to come around, and some days you'll have a high carb day on your leg training day, and then some days you'll have a medium, some days you'll have a low. Maybe they synchronize that, so it's 5 days of training and 3 days of carbs. So you do, you end up matching up every 15 days, something like that, right? And then there's things that are in between, right? Where people do highs and lows, or they intentionally set it up so that you're getting high carbs on the days when you're training your weak muscle groups, whatever it might be. So it's high, low, or high, low, low, high, low, low, or whatever. So at that far end, like the nutrient timing is basically, the way I understand it, is to match the carbs to the demands of exercise and to the recovery demands. So get the carbs in so you feel like training for those ergogenic effects on glycogen, blah, blah, blah. And then because having the carbs, and usually higher carb days also mean higher caloric intake days. So that matches. And you could do that to like bring up a weak muscle group. You have X number of calories throughout the week that are set at a certain level, so you're not gaining too fast. You're not just putting on excess fat unnecessarily. If you're gaining 3 pounds every week and you're not just coming off of a show, then that might be a little bit too much. You're going to have a bad P ratio. So you take that, whatever that average caloric intake is a day, and then you increase it maybe the day of and the day after training a weak muscle group. And so that might mean, 3,000 a day. So you might do 3,500 or 4,000 on those 2 days. And the other days of the week, it might be 2,700, whatever balances that out. So that focuses your recovery and your training. So you're good on those days. And the other workouts would then be adjusted. So that you maybe, like, let's say your back is a strong muscle group. You're going to take in fewer calories on that day. You may be able to hold on to back size with much less training. So you drop the volume down so you don't beat yourself in the hole and then accidentally actually train your back into the ground because you're taking in fewer calories on that day. So that's kind of that totally makes sense when you're syncing up the training and the diet. Now, the third genre, this is the one it's at the other end of like a strict nutrient timing. It was where you just have like seemingly no synchronization of your carbs and your training, right? And the thing that I think one reason why that might work is basically it could boil down to, well, at least one thing could be a metabolic flexibility effect, right? So metabolic flexibility basically is the ability to appropriately, so to speak, oxidize whatever fuels or put whatever fuels to use are incoming in the diet rather than store them as fat. And that's very strongly associated with insulin sensitivity. So this is an idea that I just had a kind of a deep dive in a client consultation on this a couple months ago or so. But one thing that might lead to greater, and we want metabolic flexibility. So if you bring carbs, if you have a bunch of carbs in your diet and you have good insulin sensitivity, you don't want those carbs to go to fat. If you take in a high fat meal, you want to be able to adequately oxidize the fat, right? If you can't, then you store the fat, and that's not good. So good metabolic flexibility is going to be associated with a P ratio. So if you are you stimulating the system with variations in carbohydrate and fat intake, that would, at least theoretically, maybe it pans out. I haven't seen a bodybuilding or a resistance exercise study where they did this per se. But the idea would be then that you train the system, or sort of entrain the system, to be able to handle both incoming fats and incoming carbs, because that's what it's faced with. And of course the exercise helps a lot with metabolic flexibility, right? So it might be, as someone's dieting down, a lot of times the carb cycling happens on a diet, but it can also be used off season. But if someone's dieting down, or it doesn't matter either way, if you are having, for instance, leg days, sometimes you have lots of carbs and then sometimes you have little carbs. Those days, for instance, when you have fewer carbs coming in, mean, and of course you're exercising too, which sort of gets this entire adaptive process up and running, means that your body is going to be forced to, or it's going to be at least stimulated to, use more fats on those days. It's also going to make the body, the muscles that you've just trained, more sensitive to carbohydrate coming in. So you make the body more adept at oxidizing fat, because you have days when it has to oxidize fat. You're basically providing the stimulus to be a fat oxidizing machine on those days, so to speak. And then you're also sensitizing to carbohydrate because you had a low carb day. And then when the carbs come in, you load them in more effectively. And that comes from, for instance, the original studies showing that lower muscle glycogen you have, the more rapid the muscle glycogen replenishment you'll get. You increase insulin sensitivity when you have lower glycogen levels, insulin sensitive to carbohydrates. So the back and forth basically is teaching the muscle to be a better oxidizer of both fats and carbohydrates coming in, and having a more metabolic flexibility is in your favor for dropping body fat for sure, and potentially for gaining less body fat on the way up. Because you're basically throwing just to use more kind of bro-ish terms, you're throwing curveballs, metabolically speaking, at the body in terms of what the incoming nutrients are. Now you could overdo that, I think, and it could work against you if you decide, one day I'm going to do whatever 1,500 grams of carbs on leg day, and it's just it's so much that you're starting to push towards de novo lipogenesis type of thing, where you're doing fat, and like it's just overkill. And then the next day you train legs, you just do no carbs, and you go protein sparing modified fast, and you deny the muscle the caloric intake it needs to recover, just to have the energy to recover. So you make that gap between your high carb and your low carb days so extreme, then you could shoot yourself in the foot, because the high carb days would be excessive and low carb days would be overly stressful, and then you were going to evoke an adaptive process. But along with doing that, then you end up gaining body fat on the excess calorie days, and end up impairing recovery on the caloric deficit days. So that's a potential issue. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was going to ask, and I think you answered my question, is how can you tell? How can you tell if it was too many carbs, especially on the micro level, where I have maybe I'm building that surplus up for a leg day. What would be my signs, other than the fact that a few weeks down the road I notice that I'm starting to put on too much fat? I mean, would that be the main way you'd be able to tell, hey, I think I'm going a little too heavy on this?
That'd be a big indicator. As far as the total caloric intake, let's say over a week, which is calendar week is the easiest way to look at it. Most people plan things because we have a 5-day work week, so you plan your training and your diet based on that. But if you set up a reasonable caloric excess based on what had you roughly at maintenance, then you can kind of know. So let's say it's just 5,000 calories a day, right? And that's what let's say 4,000 calories keeps you at maintenance, and you're going to go then with 4,500. So you might do 5,000 on that high carb day, and then be more like 3,700. That makes sense. If on that day you're going, chances are, it's hard to say. You can't say with any absolute certainty because everyone's so different. You know this. Like some people they can pound down the carbs, and Roman Fritz pops to mind. He does a very low fat approach, and like he had a couple of years ago, he was documenting his diet, and he was doing like 10,000 calories a day. And Juan Morel, these guys were both enhanced. Juan Morel was, could eat anything he wanted to. So you have to eventually see the gains and see the scale moving up. So some people will adapt to that way. They'll have, so one way of looking at how the body regulates its body fat or its body weight is looking at like 2 intervention points. There's kind of a sweet spot, or that's where your set point, your settling point would be. And then when your body gets above a certain body weight or below a certain body weight, it'll start resisting the change, right? And it'll start to intervene and say, we're not going any further. So how hard someone intervenes that's a function of your genetics too. So some people, they just look at the extra piece of cake and they gain weight. And some people can eat as much as they want. And you'll have the guys that they're running at 182 and they're eating 5,000 calories a day, and they've been doing it for 5 months. They're going nowhere, right? Like those extreme people exist. And then other people can, they're 240 pounds and they're at 3,500 calories a day and they're gaining, So you want to look at body composition in that case. So how much the difference between the high and low carbs, or what the high carb would be, I think this is your question, is going to be a function of how that person's metabolism responds to a caloric excess, so how it intervenes when you start to go up. You may need to push much harder with other people. It's going to be a function too of training volume. So if you're doing DC training, right, and you're walking 20 minutes a day, you've got a little chihuahua that you walk around the backyard, and your caloric expenditure is low, then you're not going to be able to probably get away, unless you've got just a gifted metabolism. You're not going to get away with much. But if you're a guy who's doing 30 sets of legs, you're training legs for 2.5 hours, then yeah, you might be doing 1,000 grams of carbs a day easily. So it's going to be just something you're going to have to titrate, like most of this stuff, and go and just be reasonable to some degree. So yeah, how much you widen that gap, eventually you'll kind of know, because on the low days you just won't feel like you can do it, and you may get to where like, okay, and the only way I could recover on these days is if I do like 1/3 of my training volume. And that's no longer stimulatory. If I'm in the off season, that's not bringing me anywhere. All I'm doing is my training is suffering because my diet has too few carbs on my low carb day. And at that point, like in order to recover from this low carb day, my training has just become shit. And now you're probably backpedaling on those days, and that's not what you want. So, but yeah, I can't give you it's all contextual, like almost everything.
Yeah, I figured people might ask, so I was like, I'll try to dig in and at least try to get that, explanation as best we could.
Yeah, but I mean, you could just think, hey, I'm just like whatever. On my high days, I'm gonna go 500 above my. You gotta have a high, a neutral, and a low. So I start off with my caloric maintenance at 4,000. My high days are gonna be 4,500 coming from carbs. My low days will be 3,500 taken from carbs, and there you go. 500 calories, 125 grams of carbs. That's the difference. And see, okay, I like this. I don't feel like I'm suffering on the low carb days, and I feel fuller, and I feel like I'm recovering well on the high carb days. I'm going to bump it to 750, and then take that off on the other side. And then eventually everything, of course, would need to be going up, right? So as you get bigger, and as you want to further drive the adaptations, that 4,000 per day average might need to go to 4,250 or 4,500. And now you're at 5,250 on your high days, and 4,000 on your low days. So everything would go up. But one way you can, and this is what I tend to do with people to the extent they can, like who are doing fortitude training, is I will focus on adding on the days that they're training. So in this context, I mean, some people you can do the low days on days you don't train, but I like to add. In this case, if you're doing just a carb cycling that's just kind of whatever, try adding your calories on the high days, just as one basic approach. So you up the high days and leave all the other days alone, right? Yeah. So that average goes from 4,000 calories a day to 4,250, and that increase comes from adding on the high days, and eventually you get to the point it's like, okay, this is too much. Like I'm at 1,200 calories a day, whatever it is. I'm not getting in more calories on that day. So at that point, then you'd have to adjust the other days. You may adjust your low up a little bit, right? And if you do that, you find, okay, I can do that. That's easy to get in. And then it makes my high day, I can handle my high day still. And so you've increased the average and the total weekly calories by increasing the low day. So you can juggle them back and forth. I do this on a meal-to-meal basis with clients. Is I will ask them, like, a standard question is, what is the meal that you're the most hungry for or the least full before you start, if we're in the off season? And I add to that meal, right?
Yeah.
So, and you just, eventually the meal will change. It's meal 2 some days, and it's meal 4 one. Okay, then they're good. And like, okay, we're going to go up again. You think you can? It's like, which meal is the one we should add to? Like, oh, now it's meal 1. I'm like, okay, so you add to meal 1. And you let your body tell you, in the context of carb cycling, which day you can add to bring things up, or which day you can subtract to on the other end. So maybe it's like, okay, I've had these high, low, and middle days, and now I'm dieting down. Which day can I take away from? And it's probably going to be the high day, right? But maybe you feel like, the low day I'm not really suffering either, and I feel like I could probably drop some more fat on that low day, so I can drop that down. And eventually, okay, the low day is as low as I need to go. Don't change that.
Yeah.
Now you take from the high day, and you just let the body tell you, and you'll get in a cycle, and your body will start telling you what it should do, and you just got to listen, as opposed to thinking, let some third party person, like, what's the expert say I should do? It's like your body's telling you, work with it, like go with it, because that can make a huge difference, right? I think you can literally, and then when you make the changes, even if a coach is suggesting these to you, even if it's like, okay, I asked you which meal, and then you tell me which meal, you've just told me, you've made the decisions yourself. So it's much easier to live with, as opposed to, oh shit, this is the day where he's going to make me suffer, I've chosen
I like
this.
that approach.
Yeah.
For that, like, that's a really cool psychological side of it, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And then, of course, my goal is to get people out doing these things on their own. And by the time, it comes around, it's like, okay, we're going to make a change. And they'll just tell me, like, meal 3 is the meal to change. Like, okay, good.
Yeah. Okay.
How much do you think we should change it? 200 calories? Like, okay, good. Then you're coaching yourself. Stop paying me. Go do it on your own. And come back.
I like
when
that.
I
I do that to a degree, but I could do it more. So I'm listening to you and learning right now too. I know I could do that more than I do.
Yeah, I think I think it's just going to help with people. I mean, you're going to have people. Probably most of your clients, adherence is not an issue. They'll do it, right? Whatever you tell them, they'll do it. But I think I really think there is something to the success of a diet based on how well someone is in stress. So if you have someone you could hypnotize who just and take away the hunger, they're never hungry. They wouldn't be rolling around like smelling stuff and go, oh God, I'm so hungry. They wouldn't be like freaking out psychologically. I think that has an effect on your hormonal milieu, your cortisol, for instance. It makes a training more difficult. If you can just take away the hunger and psychologically somehow get people in the zone where they feel like that they've chosen this is okay, like they're okay, it's just hunger, it's just a thing, it's out there, it's like doing it, like, yep, I'm gonna be hungry, but whatever. And you're actually like, oh, this is good, I'm hungry. On the other side, it's like, oh, I'm glad that I'm hungry, because when I'm hungry, this is how I diet for the last whatever X number of years, decades, literally. I know what my right amount of hunger was. I know, like, okay, this is too much. And once you sort of feel like, I know I'm steering the ship and I'm going right into the wavy waters where it should be very turbulent. This is my, like, I know I need to go there. Then it's not so bad, because you're like, it's like you are where you want to be. You're not resisting the state of affairs because you've chosen them, right? And you're supposed to be hungry, but you're not suffering because you're not resisting it, right? You're accepting it.
Yep.
So anyway.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. You know what? I think that's part of the reason I always want to really explain to somebody why we're doing what we're doing too. Versus if you just tell them like, hey, do this. It's one thing, and like you said, they'll comply. You know, people who are serious, they'll just listen. But if you explain the why, then they get behind it more. They're like, oh yeah, we're doing this because it's going to do this for me. I want to see that happen for me, so let's do this.
Right.
There's something to be said about that. My other thought instantly is, you're like, if there's some way we could take away the hunger, I'm thinking like everybody who's using the GLP-1 medications now. Like, that's the new thing. And I think you can overdo it with that stuff. And maybe it does take away, like, some of us feel in bodybuilding that that's probably a whole other podcast in itself. It takes away like some of the life lesson stuff that you get about like learning the level of acceptance that you have to have. Because I think that's the key, is And I think you were kind of saying that is acceptance. You know, you can have acceptance for your situation. And I'm going to take you back, Scott, like all the way back to 2000 and maybe like 16, man. I was talking about dieting and talking about suffering. And I was talking about like, man, the more you suffer, you know, the more I'm suffering, the better I know I'm doing. And you agreed with that. But you're like, you know, I never look at it as suffering. And I wanted to share this with the audience, too, in case they hadn't heard us say this. You said, I never look at it as suffering. And I still remember the words you used. You said, I see suffering as something that is being done to you. You can be in discomfort while you're dieting, but if you choose to do it, you're never suffering because you could always stop. And I honestly, man, at that point, because I had always looked at it as like, you got to suffer, you know? And it changed my perspective from that point forward. And I literally, from that day forward, I never used the word suffering again.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken that from the Buddhist tradition, you know, the way it's kind of talked about now. And it's like, oh, he's just playing with the semantics of it. Like, it's like, because most people say suffering, and I think they mean that it's painful, that it's uncomfortable, that they're in discomfort. But yeah, when you can recognize that, you know, true suffering means that you don't want to have happening what's happening. That's suffering, right? When you're in a situation that you don't want to be in. But, you know, you can also be in a situation where you're dieting down. You're like, okay, this is more uncomfortable than it should be. I shouldn't, like, this actually fits with what we're talking about. It's like, okay, now I'm too hungry on my low carb days. I can recognize I have a gut feeling, having done this a while, I shouldn't be this hungry, at least not yet. Maybe 3 weeks out, I might be okay, but I'm still at 11% body fat. I shouldn't be this hungry. It's too much.
Yeah.
Then you might see the scales dropping and you're really weak on those days or whatever. But yeah, just to wrap your head around the fact that this, it's the vehicle by which I get where I'm trying to go is the pain and this discomfort. And the GLP-1 agonist, it's interesting. I mean, this is a huge area in sports ethics. Like, what is, and I think this has massive carryover to bodybuilding. This is at the kind of the root of how I see. Said someone a voice message the other day is like, oh, actually this morning is that one of the main points of bodybuilding in my mind is to improve yourself. And we think about it in this external physical way. But if those efforts are to teach you something that then you can use elsewhere in your life, which is what people talk about sport being about. The great movie Chariots of Fire has this as a theme, with the idea, you know, that someone who's at the university, who's an athlete scholar, should be someone who isn't paying a coach, because the coach is taking away from the learning process they're getting from being an athlete and being extraordinary, in that they are both an athlete and they're juggling that with their scholastic efforts. So is when it comes to bodybuilding, imagine this. Like, imagine, I'm going to take it to an extreme and kind of blow it out of proportion a little bit. Imagine what would happen with someone. And this is when we're getting there in terms of PED use when people are very young, especially people who have really good genetics, GLPs. Imagine if you could just take someone who says, you know, I want to be a bodybuilder, and just they had the genie in the bottle that all of a sudden they can make a wish, and then they just become Ronnie Coleman, Mr. Olympia, right? Yeah. And they get all the glory, they get everything that comes with that, and they just keep on just beating everybody without doing anything. They just sit at home and play video games and eat Doritos, and they look ridiculous. And they're
like some pros I know.
Yeah, I mean that happens. I mean, and you see often, this isn't everybody, but you see often that pros are not the best people to ask for insights, because they haven't had to have any. They're like, literally, I mean, their genetics are so good that it disallows them gaining the insights that come with having had the struggle. It's the struggle, it's the difficulties which teach you how to overcome them. If you haven't had them, then you don't know how to do it, right? If you've never had to change your own tire, you just call your AAA or whatever, they come fix it for you. You're never gonna have to know how to, ask someone, who drives a high luxury car, who has, highest end insurance, how to change a tire. They don't even know where to find the jack, how to get the lug nuts off or whatever. So, but if you imagine someone who just could go from their normal percent body fat down to 4% without any struggle. Like, boom, you're just there. Not even have to change anything. That's what the GLPs are kind of doing. People just aren't hungry, so they don't have that difficulty. They're not learning anything. This is the thing I think the drug companies know. We're getting kind of off topic here, but they're like, this is a drug dealer type of a way of going about things, in that we got a drug where people are going to get to where they want to go body fat wise really easily without learning how to diet, without learning how to put up with a certain amount of hunger, without having to exercise. They're not going to know anything about counting their calories, counting their macros, finding a dietary strategy, which was nothing. And then they're going to get there and they want to stay there without a doubt. And
how are they going to do that?
How are they going to do that? You have to get more of the drug. They're hooked. It's almost like an addict. It's like the only way you can feel the way you want to feel, the only way you can be the way you want to be, slimmer, is with our drug, because we got you there without you having anything else to stand on except the drug. It's all on the drug. And that's if you told people, like, okay, what we're going to do with the GLP-1s is we're going to make it, you're going to get there effortlessly. So I think some people would just swallow the pill and hop into the matrix and just live in their pod. I don't know. But a lot of people would say, I don't want that. Like, you're going to take away, you take away someone's freedom in almost in a certain way, because now they can't. Now when it's a really interesting. I'm not an expert here, but it's a really interesting psychological scenario when people change their body composition, change their body substantially. You see it oftentimes, unfortunately, with women who were very, very overweight, who drop a lot of that body weight. And they were they had basically a guard. They were shielding themselves with the body fat in some cases, and then they drop the body fat and they start getting all sorts of attention, and they don't know what to do with it. And some women will then eat them because they don't feel uncomfortable in that. They will then go back to making themselves overweight, even though there was a certain amount of unhappiness there, because they don't know how to be in that position. So the other way around, people diet down, and now they have this new body type, and they're there for a couple of years. And they'll do anything to stay there. The idea of going back to how they once were. So anyway,
I have seen it happen where it will give people the opportunity to get a little bit of distance between their emotional baggage with eating and allow them that space to then kind of, okay, I understand I can't be on this forever. I need to redevelop my relationship with food.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of thing. And I think it, there is that aspect of it. It's interesting though. There's so many interesting little psychological aspects that go along with that medication, because there's also the people around you that will discredit you for having lost all the fat because you used the drug, planting the seed in your head, oh, I can't stop using this. That person told me if I stop taking this, it's all going to go. And I know people that have said that. Yeah. Like a guy who was pretty heavy, definitely diet, like insulin dependent diabetic, got on semaglutide, lost all his passion for delicious foods, and just eats to survive now. And his family members, older guy, 60s going to 70, and his family members around him, brothers and sisters, are saying, yeah, that's just because you're on the medication, you're taking that drug, so it's interesting, all the different dynamics that do go into it.
There's a kind of a parallel with antidepressants, in that the way I sort of see them, they can be very, very helpful to people, especially I think when coupled with therapy. So you can get some distance, like you said. I like how you phrase that. You get some distance from your issues because you're not in this pit of despair where you don't care about fixing your issues and doing the deeper work to figure out why it is that you have sadness, or why it is that you can't form connected relationships. So you take the antidepressant, then you can sort of step outside, work with a therapist, work with someone to figure out what's there, and then make the internal changes. And then you won't need the depressants, because the source of the depression has been remedied to some degree. So that's the thing here, is you can get someone going in the right direction potentially by giving them this, but unfortunately, just with antidepressants, they get prescribed. The doctors just send people on their way, and they don't send them to a therapist. So you feel better.
That's a problem.
But you're just band-aiding the issue. So when people take GLP-1 agonists, semaglutide or what have you, and they have a poor relationship with food, and they never address that, and the doctors don't know what to do. Maybe they send them to an RD, but they don't address if whatever psychological issues may be related to why the person ended up having so much body fat. Then you're just band-aiding. You're just giving people a pharmacological covering strategy that seems like it solves the problem. It takes them, like, covering strategy is what I think of when people talk about drug addiction. So if you go and get drunk a lot, that's a covering strategy. You're covering up some psychological state you want to be in. People who do cocaine or gamble, get addicted to video games, pornography, they're covering up a psychological mental state that they don't want to be in. And if you're you're unsatisfactorily overweight, you're obese, you have lots of body fat, that's a place you don't want to be in, and there can be psychological reasons why you got there. So you give the drug, it takes you out of that place, but it didn't get to the root of the issue. Like, you still have that poor association with food, that poor relationship with food. You don't take care of your body maybe the way you could if you had a healthier mental state for a plethora of reasons potentially, and you just cover up the root of the issue, and it seems like everything's okay. When someone gets drunk who's an alcoholic, well, they feel all right. They feel good. They're not worried. They're not sad anymore. They're on cocaine. They're just zipping around, whatever it might be. It can be kind of a covering strategy. It doesn't seem that way because the person's mental state hasn't been changed per se, but it has features of a covering strategy like those addictive types of behaviors do, which is kind of scary because it's everywhere now. I mean, it's going to be, I don't know what percentage of people are getting it. I think semaglutide is the most prescribed drug in the U.S. now. You can look that up.
You're kidding me.
I can't remember the statistics, but it's one of the most prescribed drugs that there is. It's definitely in the top 10. I've seen lists before. I haven't seen the studies, where the actual data is just sort of clickbaitish stuff that people have sent me. But yeah, and rightfully so. We have an epidemic of obesity, right? So there's plenty of potential customers out there for this stuff. So I
see the stats at that. I can't say the name of it. That amino site. Anybody who uses code THINK over there. Yeah. I see the people who actually are getting that. There's a lot of people who are getting it. We'll say places other than their doctor. Mm-hmm. That was also a plug.
Yeah. Right.
Incognito plug. Yeah.
I mean, it's like. I think there probably are, some drugs that are just so ridiculously addictive, like physiologically, biologically addictive. You could just sort of stay away from them, like pretty much.
Oh, like we know.
Yeah. Right. But this is it's a very powerful pharmaceutical, and I think there are places where it can be used, as long as you're aware of what you're doing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's like psilocybin, for instance. People are using, mind-altering drugs, and it's being used to treat depression really, really well. You can also...
and ketamine as well.
Ketamine, too, yeah. Ketamine being used for alcoholism, various things. But if you just start getting high on the stuff, right, that's a totally different use. So I think some people are just like, I don't have any interest in... And the thing is, like, I really think... Like, the people listening here, we're meatheads, right? We love to go and just bang it up in the gym. We're in a very small percentage of even those people who exercise regularly. You wouldn't think so from the gyms per se, but people come and go from the gyms. So the average person doesn't want to go and just engage in, some form of a rat running in a treadmill, where you're just like, okay, go in, you're going to do 3 sets of 10, and you're going to, do all this boring exercise, and you're going to go from one purple machine to the next purple machine, and then you're done. Right. People, we don't play enough. When was the last? I would love to see a doctor, maybe he's a naturopath, do this, but where it says, okay, your prescription is to go and play with your kid at the playground 45 minutes a day, every day after school. You go and play. Yeah. You get on the playground, you run around, you kick the soccer ball, whatever it is. You do the jungle gym. And have fun and move, just friggin' move. But you don't have to go and get on a treadmill or go and like work out, formally. People don't want to do that. So that's the thing that's missing is we don't have play. We don't dance enough. I don't think. I've been like the last week or so, I've been I spent so much time doing all the German shit. I'm not going to get off topic here, and so it's all intellectual work, and it's really enjoyable, right? Listening to like talks on philosophy and that sort of thing. But I love music. I'm really musically inclined, and I've neglected that side of myself. So I've been playing music, and I go out in the yard with the dogs and I dance while I throw the ball to Jessie, my puppy, and I just listen, and I sing, and someone
they love the dogs love that too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They know when you're playing and you're singing, and they have fun with that too.
I do that when I lift sometimes too. I sing and kind of go bonkers.
Yeah.
Kind of like Ronnie Coleman.
I do all this same
dancing,
stuff.
You know,
I do
stuff. Yeah.
If I have my dog with me, especially, I'll give her some claps and get her going, and she's running in circles. And
right, we don't do that enough. You know, it should be. This exercise should be play. It should be fun. Like go in there and get at it. But we're going to war. Tanya says, that's okay too. Like that's like we have warrior archetypes within us as well. So that they're gonna let that out. I think, I think
she's joking.
I know.
You know
Totally is. Yeah. Scott's turning into a damn hippie. I've always been a hippie, man.
He's always been. What do you mean turning into? Did you see the long hair before?
Yeah, right.
You used to have the long hair. He was you the first time I ever saw you, man, was on the Dave Henry video. And Dave Henry comes into Scott Stevenson's gym, and it's also like an acupuncture clinic. And Scott's got this long hair, and what? Who is this guy?
Yeah. In the cover of the Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book, I have a ponytail. You just can't see it because it's a dark background. It's in the darkness.
Oh yeah,
so,
No, I knew it was there, but maybe not everybody else.
You have to look. You'd have to look closely to see it.
Oh yeah.
So, anyway, the GLP-1. I got a podcast with Brandon DeCruz. It's like maybe 3 months old that we did. We went through a lot of the research and that kind of stuff. So people who are interested can check that out to get my thoughts and Brandon's thoughts on those. So, and I think I have I did do a talk on John Meadows' site too. So
did you? You mentioned that a while back. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some more stuff out there. So, but we have some other questions, I think.
Well, we're kind of running low on time.
Oh shit! It's late, isn't it? Okay. Yeah. Right.
But
good point.
I will say this. I wanted to mention again. You mentioned your book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. I didn't want to cut you short at the beginning, but I wanted to get into the topic.
Right.
But so you were saying though that once again that 15% you said will go to the ASPCA, and you don't even have to. I love that on your end. You don't even have to do anything. It just goes directly to them.
Yeah, I guess I probably should see how I do a tax write. I don't really care about doing tax write-offs when I give to charities. I mean, unless something big, like I might donate my van, for like $10,000 to charity because no one wants to buy it. Yeah.
Okay.
But otherwise, But it's so simple. And Amazon used to have something like that, and they discontinued it. Did you ever see that on Amazon?
I don't remember that. No.
For like 3 years, I did that, and it just automatically ended. And there's no other option. Like it wasn't just my charity. They all just vanished. So I don't know. Maybe they just decided that's their greed got bumped up a notch, and they decided we're not doing this anymore.
But that's going to be on eBay. So you'll have a link. You have that in the Facebook group. I put that link into the description here, that will still work, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have 21 of them left. I had a couple dozen in boxes, so I figured that's a good start.
Okay, so you get them while they last. It sounds like you're already starting to go through them because you just put that up the other day.
Yeah.
And what they can, if you were to buy it, do I also put like a note in there and saying like, hey Scott, can you sign it for me and say something like that? Is that what you do, or how does that work?
Yeah, there's a place where you can fill in a note. I wasn't seeing it. eBay sends me all these notifications, but it didn't tell me there's a note. So you just put in there what you want me to sign. Some people, the one person who did that said just write something corny, which is what I said in the description. If you don't tell me, I'm going to write. If you tell me, I'll just write something corny. But I'll just write my signature. I won't do that. But like some people, like it's a birthday gift to someone, so happy birthday to John, whatever. So I'll write whatever they want. A lot of time, and there's Christmas coming up, so
it's a great time.
Yeah. So, but it's going to the ASPCA.
That reminded me of something way off topic. When I worked in photography, there was this woman that I really looked up to. She's a really pretty lady from New Orleans, and she came out to the workshops, and I worked for her. I was her assistant for the week, and she gifted me her book, and she signed it. And when she signed it, I said, we were spending, her class and myself We were spending the evening at her place, and she had a fireplace, and I set the fire up and everything. You know, I'm the assistant, and I'm just hanging out. So I was like, oh, you know, get the fire going. So I got some wood, chopped it up, got the fire cooking and everything. Nice. So when she signed it, I leaned in. I said, hey, would you do me a favor? And she said, what's that? I said, when you sign that, will you write, thank you for lighting my fire? She laughed. She laughed, and she did write it.
Oh,
too.
no shit!
So,
that's awesome. Yeah. That's hilarious.
Yeah. She was a good lady, much older than me. She was like much older. Right. So, I was probably like 25, and she had to be like a good 50 something.
Come on, baby, light my fire.
Yeah. We do have some more stuff though, so they'll give us something to cover on the next show. Okay. This is a good nutrition segment. Next time we'll get into. I love getting you into training because you start like I see the fire light up with training stuff. So we've got at least one training question, and you guys any questions you have, especially training questions, comment them on this show, and we will tackle them on the next. Of course, like I said, TrueNutrition.com. You can get it's 15 servings of 50 grams of carbs of carbo load for $10. You can get that for $10. That's 30 workouts if you do 25 grams of carbs per workout. They also do have like the high end stuff. You can get some highly branched cyclic dextrin there, and you can even get the John Meadows the what is it, Perry MD that they have, especially if you like what's that flavor? It's like
is it cherry lime?
Thank you. Yeah, cherry limeade is the flavor. So if you're like a limeade fan, that's good. I like personally the MPA muscle intrusion flavor better, which is it's just like a lemon ice they call it. Man, that stuff is delicious. And you always want to mix it real thin. You know, you don't want it to be like sludge going down. We're trying to hack the digestive system. I want to do a segment on that at some point about like how to use intra-workout carbs. I might even do it myself because it's not something that's complex, and I could explain this is how I would mix it, this is how I would use it. Anyway, use our code THINK over there and supplementsource.ca for our Canadians. They have great deals that change week to week. And of course, thank you to everybody from Patreon. You guys are freaking awesome, and I'm trying to put out early releases when I can. And keep loading us up with questions over there. Load us up with questions for this show at Patreon, and you guys will get priority. And thank you to everybody hanging in the live stream. I understand this episode was a little funky to watch live, but it'll be a lot better in the recorded version, I hope.
Yeah.
You know?
It will be.
For another episode of Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson, I'm Scott McNally. We will see you soon. Thank you, Scott.
Word. You're welcome, brother. Always.
See you guys.